May peace and God's blessings be upon you. Welcome to a special program of the Islamic Center of Southern California. My name is Aziza Hasan, and I have the pleasure of serving as a volunteer on the Interfaith Committee here at the Islamic Center of Southern California. This program has been a long time in the making. It's been many years of friendships and relationships and people coming together and people just really showing up for each other. And that to me has really been the hallmark of my commission service. I've had the pleasure of serving on a couple of different commissions, from the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships to now on the Civil and Human Rights Commission at in the city of Los Angeles, a fairly new commission, really designed to have a place of redress where people can say something's not right. We want some accountability. And so I know that every single step is one person investing in a community, in each other, and that we continue to invest in one another. I remember actually when I first moved out to California, it seemed like, that was the right thing to do to build something new. And I walked in the middle of a hailstorm where Dr. Maher Hathout and the LA Human Relations Commission at the county level, he was going to be honored with an award, and it just seemed like everything was falling apart, that there was this mentor that I really dearly admired, and I watched one person after the other stand up and vouch for him from different faith communities, within the commission, outside the commission, all over. And it was clear to me in that moment that relationships really matter. People show up for each other and they get to know one another. And that's how I actually got to know both of our speakers today, Mr. Gideon Kracov and Shawn Landres. They've both been incredible partners who have helped me navigate different spaces, both within government and within community, all in service of a greater tomorrow for ourselves and for our children and for our communities, believing that a rising tide raises all boats and that we can create a future that our children are deserving of. And so today is going to start off first with a conversation with Mr. Gideon Kracov, and then we'll move to a conversation with Shawn Landres, and then an opportunity for Q&A. So make sure you write down your questions and we'll make sure to get to them at the end of the first portion of our program. We went ahead and recorded the conversation with Mr. Kracov earlier because he's right now teaching a law class, and we really wanted to make sure that we got his voice. So without further ado, here's the first portion of our program. So our first guest today is really no stranger to the Islamic Center. I actually got to know Mr. Gideon Kracov around the board in the boardroom at the Islamic Center, around the main table, as we were trying to navigate through essentially crisis when Dr. Hathout, may he rest in peace, was up for an award by the Human Relations Commission. And really he showed up as a friend and an ally and someone who just wanted to be effective. And that's really been the trajectory of our friendship, and the kind of leader that he is. I'll drop his bio in the chat now, but to give you just a little bit of a highlight, he's a lawyer in private practice in Los Angeles, and he represents clients in civil law, environmental, and use cases. He's a California Governor Newsom appointee to both the California Air Resource Board, KARB, and the South Coast Air Quality Management District Governing Board, AQMD. CARB is the state's lead agency combating air pollution and climate change, and the South Coast AQMD has responsibility for improving air quality for the 17 million people living in Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. And he actually is he served with me on the Civil and Human Rights Commission for a period of time. But to start off, Gideon, you've been on so many different commissions and you currently serve in really high profile places. What got you started? Why do you serve as an appointee in so many different places, and what draws you in?
Well, thank you, Aziza, for having me come and speak today. I'm so appreciative of the work that NewGround does. Been a supporter since the early days. And yes, I remember, I think this is going back to 1999 or 2000, working with you. And I think Adina also was involved then with Salam Mamariyati and Meyer Hattout on Muslim Jewish dialogue work, which I was so proud to participate in and was very meaningful for me. And so happy to see the leadership that's been developed there at MPAC and sprouting new organizations like NewGround. David Weiner is a friend as well. So just really appreciate and respect the work that you're doing, and always do what I can to support it. And thank you for all that you do. Also as a city civil rights commissioner. So, I guess I'm not that different than you, Aziza. I'm interested in people, interested in policy and public service. And I think that sort of came from my upbringing. There is a strain, certainly within the Jewish culture, of tikkun olam, giving back to the world, working with other groups in coalition. That's something that's always been very important to American Jewry. And that's sort of the tradition that I come from. My father was a public servant, worked as a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office back in New Jersey for many years, then was a judge. So sort of public service, interested in working with others, has always been a part of who I am and the values that I have. So I've always been interested in finding ways to serve. And, as I think you recognize, and that's one of the reasons why you're having these panels, these boards and commissions are a great way to serve. For the most part, these are volunteer assignments. You're not doing this to really get paid. On these boards, I make $100 a day. Sometimes the meetings go 12, 14 hours. Thankfully, my wife makes a good living, so she can bring home the dollars while I do some of this public service. And that is something that we had to decide as a family, and that she supported me with. So I've always been involved in politics and policy. I got involved in Democratic Party politics in the late 1990s when I moved to Los Angeles. Got to know several folks, mostly in the Latino political community. We were all young at that time, but I worked on some campaigns with folks like Senator Alex Padilla, future speakers of the Assembly, Fabian Nunez and John Perez, future Senate Pro Tem Kevin De Leon, and now City Council person. And we worked as young folks on campaigns for Democratic candidates. Got to know those folks. Those folks in time became in important positions in the governor's office and other places. And so I was encouraged to submit some applications. My appointments have been at many levels, state, city, primarily county as well. And the way that it works with the state is you submit an application. The governor has an appointments unit. I am an environmental lawyer, so there's many ways to serve in sort of that space that I have expertise and knowledge in. You certainly can do other things and learn and just bring your set of tools to different categories, but that's sort of what I knew. So my first appointment was during the Davis administration, and this had to do with oversight of the light duty vehicle smog check program. When you go and have your car smog checked, there was a commission that sort of oversaw that, made sure that it was effective, made sure that it was fair. There was issues sometimes with fraud in that system. So the commission was designed to do that. So I started on little commissions like that. Later on, through the city of LA, and Eric Garcetti was appointed to the Prop O Oversight Committee. Prop O was $500 million of bond money to clean the city's rivers and beaches and lakes like Echo Park Lake, for example. It was an oversight body, make sure the money was spent wisely and on the projects that matter to the community. So I did that. And then over time, came back to the state, worked on commissions that oversaw mining and geology. That's primarily the industrial materials like the aggregate and the quarries that we use for concrete and cement. If you drive down the 605 freeway, those huge quarries there in Irwindale, making sure that that material is available for our construction and our infrastructure in our state, but also in an environmentally sustainable way. Similarly, again, in the environmental space, did some work on oversight of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. This is an agency that oversees our hazardous waste sites. It's a very serious problem at a facility called Exide in East LA, which is a former battery smelter that had a lot of off-site lead emissions, and the Department of Toxics needed some help in dealing with that and really overhauling its operations. So I served on a committee that oversaw that. So sort of worked my way up. And then recently, Governor Newsom appointed me to these two commissions that I serve on now. The first is the South Coast AQMD, which oversees air quality for the 18 million people in Orange, LA, Riverside, and LA counties. We can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like. And then I also was appointed by the governor as the representative from the South Coast to sit on the Air Resources Board. And the Air Resources Board is probably the number one, possibly, climate change regulator almost in the world. We also regulate all of the tailpipe emissions from trucks and cars. We have the motor vehicle standards, et cetera. So, I've sort of worked my way up, tried to do the best job that I could in each of these positions, work hard. And we'll talk more about some of the skills that I think are necessary to be successful. And if, in life, in theory, if you do a good job and bring your lunchbox and lunch pail every day and show up and leave the place better than when you found it, there'll be other opportunities for you. And so that's sort of been my approach. And that's sort of where I've ended up in these positions now, which, for me are an incredible thrill, an incredible highlight. As an environmental lawyer, the opportunity to sit on the South Coast AQMD and the Air Resources Board are pretty much the top of the field. So kind of when I look back and say, oh my gosh, look where you are, it's a little bit hard to believe, but I'm there and I'm happy doing it. I'm happy where I am now and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you a little bit today about it.
That's wonderful. I'm really struck by kind of the arc that you laid out, especially in terms of you were actually working on people's campaigns, you were working on issues that mattered connected to environment already. So it was kind of a mix both of your professional expertise and your wanting to do something to heal the world around you. And you still were applying because the process you kind of alluded to, that for gubernatorial appointments, you have an application process. And it sounds like you would actually mention your professional qualifications as something that was helpful. Is there anything else that you can tell people about how you were appointed in the different spheres? Because I know when, on the Civil and Human Rights Commission, what was that process like? Or because you've been in so many different kinds of commissions.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie to you. These, can be sort of, competitive, and there can be a bit of a Byzantine process between the time that you apply and the time that you're appointed. And relationships matter. It's hard to come in, out of the blue on these things. So, like anything else in life, obviously your qualifications and your CV matter. Through my early work, again, this is going back to the late 1990s, I got to know an up-and-coming public servant, an up-and-coming lawyer named Catherine Rivera, who worked on some of these campaigns and was active in the Gray Davis campaign and went to work in that administration. And lo and behold, 20 years later, Catherine became Governor Newsom's appointments secretary. So when the time came, I was able to put a call into her and say, I'm interested in these things. They don't just fall in your lap. You have to work for them. If you don't have the relationships, you probably have somebody who does, and maybe those folks don't know Catherine Rivera. They don't know folks in the governor's office, but they know Aziza Hasan. and Aziza Hasan knows Gideon Kracov, and issues of competence and diversity, difference of perspective. The governor's looking for those kinds of folks to add different perspectives on these boards and commissions. So maybe connections can be made that way. But you have to have a good solid CV. Obviously, prior experience is helpful, but the relationships are important, and getting yourself a foot in the door, whether through your own relationships or through others, are important. Really just like anything else. If you've got a job application that's competitive, the hiring person may have 100 resumes. How do you get yours to the top? So, this really isn't that different. I do think that, there is some momentum and inertia you can get, from this. As I indicated, I served on, smaller, less high profile government commissions and did a good job, or at least think I did. I had the opportunity, as I mentioned, to sit on the Prop O oversight committee of the city's rivers and beaches bond. That was a Garcetti appointment, so I did that for a while. And then, later when Eric was looking to fill the Civil Rights Commission, I'm sure he remembered, that earlier service. And also way back when, in the late 1990s, when we had, events at City Hall about our days of dialogue and showing to the world that Muslims and Jews in our city cared about each other and, could sign on to a common code of conduct. Sitting in the back of that press conference was a guy running for city council back then, Eric Garcetti. So, Eric remembered, the work that we did together, back in the late 1990s. And I imagine when he was looking to staff the Civil Rights Committee, remembered that and remembered that work that I did. So, like anything else, the relationships matter. Doing a good job with ethics and loyalty, hopefully build up to provide you other opportunities in life.
Beautiful. You also mentioned skills. What are those skills that you feel like really would serve somebody trying to go for an appointment, or just to actually serve effectively?
So typically, we're talking about, boards and commissions. So, and I know you're probably going to have, as part of the overall presentation, description of, what these are. But typically you're looking at, city, county, or state boards and commission. Again, these are volunteer assignments for the most part, some obviously less rigorous than others. Maybe they'll meet, once a month, maybe they'll meet, twice a month. And they can be, everything, from, let's say at the city level, the commissioners overseeing the, fire department, or commissioners overseeing information technology and technology advancement at the city, or commissioners overseeing the pension system, or, like you are working on civil and human rights with a newly founded department. At the state level, there's a list. You can go on the governor's website, check on appointments, and there's a list of probably 1,000 different commissions, everything from the horse racing board to boards that oversee the licensing of architects, to the air resources board, where I am in my field. There's also the state water board. There's a newly created board, again, to oversee the Department of Toxics. There's regional water boards, one in Los Angeles, but so many different things involving education, prisons. Corrections, doesn't matter what you're interested in. There's probably a place, for you. Also at the county level, Los Angeles County has probably 100, 150 boards and commissions. I had the opportunity to sit on one, again, with my area of expertise that involved solid waste and trash and recycling policy in the county. So, that's sort of the landscape of these things, and each has a different appointing body. In LA City, it could be the city council, could be the mayor. In the county of Los Angeles, it could be individual boards of supervisor members, or it could be something that the board appoints as a whole. At the state level, you have appointments from the governor's office, also have appointments from the state senate, as well as the state assembly. So you've got to work through those different appointing bodies. But pretty much, no matter which of these you do, you're going to be working in between sort of, two different bodies. One is the staff. the staff for the respective government agency that you're working on. If it's the fire department, it's the fire department administration and officials. If it's the city's pension board, it's all of the folks that operate the pensions. For me at the South Coast AQMD, which is a governor's appointee, it's the staff, 800 people over in Diamond Bar, where our headquarters is. The Resources Board has 1,300, I believe, all throughout the state, but mostly in Sacramento. So you've got interactions with the staff, and then you're on the board. And the board, which is a typical situation, works at the higher level, more on policy and things like that. We don't do the day-to-day, similar to a nonprofit, for example. You interact with the administration, usually the high administration at the agency, and you have to learn how to work with the staff. And of course, the other piece of it is the board. You're one of 7 or 11 board members, and you have to, learn how to work with the board. So again, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say this is, a lot of relationships. You have to understand, the culture of your agency. Is it a staff-driven agency where staff does a lot of the work and kind of brings to you proposals that are pretty much fully cooked? And, you don't have a lot of say in that other than maybe at the board meeting, sort of at the last moment. Or is it a culture of the agency where the board is very involved, where there's a lot of board subcommittees that are very active at the early stages of policy development with active committees, and where there's a strong balance of power and activism between the board and the staff? Each agency is going to have a little bit of its own culture. Some boards are very high functioning, where you're going to have a lot of active board members that show up, that really kick butt. Or maybe you have boards where people aren't engaged, or you have quorum problems and things aren't that functional. So each one has a little bit of a different culture. You have to sort of understand that culture, and we'll talk a little bit more. You have to figure out your priorities. What are you trying to do there? And once you identify those priorities, once you get a little bit of a sense of the culture of the agencies, and by the way, both of my new appointments, it's been during COVID. Pretty much the whole thing has been on Zoom. So it's been hard to get a sense of that internal culture, to get to know people. In any large bureaucracy, the relationships and being able to maneuver those things are important. Well, it's much harder on Zoom. But ultimately, you have to figure out, once you figure your priorities, how do you work with these folks? How do you become persuasive? How do you move these agencies to accomplish your goals and priorities? And it also helps if you have a common interest or a common mind with your appointing authority on what your goals and priorities are. The governor appoints you to the Air Quality Management District or the Air Resources Board. Okay, Governor Newsom, what do you want me to accomplish here? What are your priorities? So it's important, from the beginning, during the interview process, to go back and forth for them to understand what you're interested in and what your strengths and perhaps needs are, but also what are they trying to accomplish? So you can go in with sort of a common understanding of, from yourself and the appointing authority, what you're trying to do. And hopefully the staff at the agency understand that too as you're coming in. And then you'll have a little bit of a mandate to work on these things as you get moving as a board commissioner.
That's some really solid and practical advice. I guess to close us out, what are you most proud of? Like maybe there was a challenge and like you found a way through. I mean, you mentioned Echo Park and the cleanup, like those are things that matter to people. And sometimes people don't behave in the best way when it's something really matters to them. So what's something you're really proud of?
Yeah, I spent some time, thinking about this question. I'll give you a couple answers. Again, I think like any relationship, any endeavor you do in life, you always want to bring out the best in the people around you. You always want to leave the situation better than you found it. And boards and commissions are no different. You want to bring out the best in your fellow board commissioners and with the staff and agency that you're in there to oversee. And when you're done, you want to be able to look back, and say that it's in a better place. Whether that means that the activities are more professional and more functional, whether you've been able to perhaps, as was the case in one of my assignments, bring in new management and sort of transition into better management. So you leave the place with a healthier environment and healthier management, whether there's policies that you're trying to accomplish. That is the fundamental goal that I believe I should evaluate myself on, and that any board and commissioner should evaluate themselves on. And frankly, in all my relationships in my life, also want to try to accomplish. Specifically, I'll say two things. I was brought in to help oversee the Department of Toxic Substances Control. I mentioned this real environmental debacle at the Exide facility in East Los Angeles, where offsite emissions of lead from that facility contaminated literally thousands of homes, mostly of low-income people of color in places like Commerce and Maywood and in East LA. And there was a lot of concern about the Department of Toxics, both its fiscal management, how it worked with communities, its timeliness and processing permits. And a lot of these challenges sort of culminated with that Exide situation that showed a lot of the needs for the agency. So I was brought in to do an independent review panel of the agency. And that was a tricky assignment. It's an independent sort of ombudsman, like inspector general, for a 2-year period to sort of study the agency and make recommendations to the legislature on how to improve the agency. And, you're coming in with that role. The agency doesn't know what to make of you. Again, trying to navigate the issues with the staff, trying to find ways to, be productive and constructive and not merely critical. And I learned some lessons along that way. I didn't do it perfectly, but we worked our tails off on that assignment, generated dozens of reports. And you know what usually happens to reports, right, Aziza? They sit on the shelf and nobody looks at them. And we did a final report and summarized the report before our board ended, our independent review panel, with a bunch of recommendations on how to improve the agency, including creating a new board for the Department of Toxics, certain timelines on permitting reviews, making sure that there was financial assurances and bonds in place so that if a facility like Exide went bankrupt, that there was money set aside to clean things up, which we don't have with Exide. And that report sort of sat on the shelf for a while. There were some recommendations that went in. Governor Brown vetoed those. They also didn't make progress with Governor Newsom. But lo and behold, last year, a comprehensive package of reforms for the Department of Toxics was approved by the legislature. And about 80% of those were the recommendations that we worked so hard on with our independent review panel. And, it showed me that when you put the time in, maybe you don't see the fruits, right away. But ultimately, in life, what goes around comes around. And, some really good, strong reforms came forward. It showed that my work was not in vain, that our suggestions were right, and that sort of those tough times, sort of straddling the line between criticism and constructive feedback to the agency. And in the end, it worked out okay. So I'm very proud of that. The reforms that came last year to the Department of Toxic Substances Control, signed by Governor Newsom. The last thing I'll say, and my work is certainly remains to be done, is at the Southwest AQMD. We have serious challenges in our region with smog. From the ports right now and the backups with the ships, the air quality has been as bad as it's been in decades. This is an embarrassment for me working on the agency and for all of us that are trying to clean the air. We've made strides this year at the AQMD. We passed a rule again in our logistics industry. The diesel trucks are a big problem. We passed a rule on warehouses, mostly in the Inland Empire, that attract a lot of these trucks, on trying to clean up, either with cleaner technology for the trucks like zero emissions or natural gas, or installing solar panels to make the sustainability of these warehouses, which are exploded in that area as e-commerce has grown, more sustainable for our area. We also passed a rule on refineries, cleaning up emissions from our refineries in Carson and Torrance and down by the ports. Both of those rules had stalled at our agency for years. So I'm very proud of passing those rules, but I've got a lot of work to do still with our ports, the ships, the trucks, the trains, and that's going to be the focus, trying to clean our air and making sure that our goods movement and ports, which are so important to our economic development, are on a more sustainable footing for our economy and for our lungs for the next generation. So that's what I'm working on now. And a little bit of a summary of some of the stuff I've been proud to work on.
It's incredible. And it's a really solid reminder that this is it's for the long term. It's to see a vision that really actually makes things better than not only where we found it, but you're reminding me of but it's both a verse in the Quran, and I know it comes from Jewish tradition too, is that you plant the tree, and a good word is like a good tree. Its roots are firm, and the fruit comes for people from the wills of the heavens. And you just don't know who's going to be able to, when you're going to be able to enjoy the fruit. But the whole point is that you have planted the tree and that you've done a good job and that you try to create a space that honors what it means to truly bring life and for other people. So thank you so much. Sorry.
I think you just said the NewGround mission statement.
Of course, yes. And that's kind of the point, right? These leaning in on these relationships in ways that really make our world better, and for all of us and for our future generations. So thank you so much for taking time to be with us. This has really been a gift, and wishing you well as you continue to serve, and hopefully we'll get to see you again very soon.
Yes, and please count me an ally to your work, and any of your folks that are interested in boards and commissions. I'd be happy to speak to them individually at any time and give them some tips and put in a word here and there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
For the second part of our program, I am pleased to welcome Shawn Landres, who's another dear friend, who is also no stranger to the Islamic Center. You have been one of those people who shows up time and time again. And Shawn is both a PhD, is immediate past chair of the Los Angeles County Quality and Production Commission. He's a past chair of the City of Santa Monica Planning Commission, a member of the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District Financial Oversight Committee, co-founder of the Jumpstart Labs, which advances research and innovation in philanthropy, interreligious engagement, and community building. Shawn was featured as an Obama White House Spotlight Innovator and has worked, and his work has been covered in major national and international media. Over the past 2 years, he has spearheaded the design of Civruta, an award-winning initiative that equips civic volunteers to be in productive public service relationships with people from across the rich diversity of LA's ethnic and religious communities, and to bring the democratic values of diversity, inclusion, and dignity to service on public boards and commissions. He's a senior fellow at the UCLA Luskin School for Public Affairs, and he holds a degree from Columbia, Oxford, and UC Santa Barbara, where he earned a PhD in religious studies. I hope that you will help me welcome Shawn Landres. Welcome me too. And Shawn, Gideon kind of gave us a snapshot of all the many ways that you can apply. We dropped it in the chat for folks on Facebook and for folks on Zoom. And I'm curious, what was your path like to commission appointments, since you've also been and continue to serve? And if there's any other steps that you think people need to know about.
Sure. But first I have to tell you how far I go back with the Islamic Center, right? So it's really a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to be with you in this conversation. You and I have been at this for a while, encouraging people to public service and finding ways to welcome people and help people see themselves in these roles. And I think that's absolutely critical. I will say my own relationship with the Islamic Center goes back to at least 2002, if around then. And I look forward to walking through the doors again in person, but it's a pleasure to be back virtually. And we've done some pretty cool stuff together over the years, through Faith Jam back in 2006 and bringing literally dozens, if not hundreds, of visiting scholars of religion and pluralism to the Islamic Center over a decade or more as they were studying religious pluralism in the United States. And seeing what has been built, what the Hathout brothers built, and everyone with them in a truly multicultural, a true setting for American Islam. And so I'm really happy to be here. But to answer your question, I would say I've always been interested in government work. I've always been interested in the way government works, the way government engages people, and in the process of policymaking, which I think Gideon did a great job of outlining, both in terms of talking about the different levels of government, but also in terms of listen to all the different things that he's done, right? All the different things that government touches. I think it's very impressive. My own story is that I attended a training put on by the Liberty Hill Foundation, which I cannot commend more highly. It's a wonderful organization, Los Angeles based, that has been doing board and commission training and civic engagement training for many years. And I went to a day-long training that they did back in, I want to say 2013, which had terrific speakers who were talking about all the processes and the pros and cons and what's amazing and what's crazy frustrating. And they handed out a list. I went online. When I went online, the first time I went online, I found the commissions that I was interested in, and they were full. they didn't have any openings. And then I thought, I'll check a few weeks later, and as it happened, Ron Galperin, whom many of us know, had just been elected as controller for the city of Los Angeles. And he, as a result of that election, stepped down from the LA County Quality and Productivity Commission. And so through a friend, I reached out to the offices of then supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky and said, I don't know if you're going to, if you're looking for an appointee, but here are my bona fides. They called me in for an interview and made the appointment. And then shortly after Supervisor Sheila Kuehl was elected, their office called and said, tell us why you should stay. And I had a conversation, and I said, this is what I'm, up to, and this is what I hope to accomplish. And they've reappointed me consistently for the last number of years. And I've had the privilege of working my way up in the commission and served for chair for 3 years in 2017, 2018, and 2019. And I've also chaired for 2 years the funding, the subcommittee that oversees our innovation funding. So that's how I made that first application. My second application was very different. It was a couple of years later, and I was wanting to get involved in Santa Monica, which is where I live, and I really cared about my city. I care about my city. I didn't have a lot of background. I hadn't really built up a lot of relationships with members of the city council at that time. But I was interested in the Social Services Commission. I was looking for an opportunity to serve that was different from QPC. Again, referring back to Gideon's conversation, I would point out that different commissions are very different from one another. Oversight commissions can be different from funding commissions, can be very different from advisory commissions. And so the county work that I do, we actually don't do policy. We don't make policy. We do a lot of other things. We're much more about the how than we are about the what. So I was interested in learning more and serving more on the what side, and discovered that the Social Services Commission had a number of vacancies. So many vacancies, in fact, that they were not quorate anymore and couldn't actually meet. So I looked into the Social Services Commission. I asked around, was it a good use of my time? Was it a functional commission? Heard a variety of answers and decided to apply. I reached out to a couple of council members and said, this is my background. I'd love to help kind of reactivate this commission if it's of interest, and secured, I think, the support of a couple of council members who really didn't have any context for me. They were interested in me because I was a volunteer who was showing up to say, I want to serve. And I really want to stress that to everyone who's listening. So much of commission service is stepping up and saying, hey, if you'll have me, I'm interested in putting in the time. And the truth is, if it's not a good fit, you can always walk away, or you can always just serve a term and then go do something else. In this case, I joined that commission, became chair shortly thereafter, served kind of 2.5 terms as chair. There was a year where I was chairing 2 commissions at once. It was pretty intense. Third committee that I'm on, I'll come back to the Planning Commission in a minute. Third committee that I'm on, the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District Financial Oversight Committee. Very different process again. I was approached by some community leaders and a couple of board of education members saying, hey, would you think about this? I put my name in, but then I was interviewed by actually a nominating committee on that committee, sort of a subcommittee. I went in for a formal interview. They reviewed my application alongside others, and then they forwarded my name back to the full committee, which forwarded my name along with others to the Board of Education, and then they appointed me. But I wasn't calling members of the Board of Education. I wasn't sort of having conversations about what kind of commissioner I'd be. That interview process took place very differently, and I've been on that committee for a few years as well. The way the Planning Commission worked out is, I've always been interested in planning and land use. It's a very different kind of commission. It's what's considered a quasi-judicial commission, which means that we hold land use hearings, we issue permits. So the oversight of us, you and I were talking about some ethics issues earlier today. The transparency required, the financial disclosures that required, they're at a whole other level to serve on the Planning Commission. We have strict rules about who we can talk to and when, if a matter is coming before us. Again, not an advisory commission like the Social Services Commission, where it's like, hey, Shawn, what do you think about this? And actually you could actually have some productive tension with the staff in a department, because you're maybe giving advice to the city council or to a board that other people don't necessarily want you to verbalize. Whereas on the Planning Commission, you're working hand in hand with city staff. Of course, you can have your disagreements, but it's a much tighter working relationship. I was talking to our city attorney, our deputy city attorney, very frequently when I was chair of that commission. In that instance, I had been interested through social services in bringing a kind of a well-being perspective. Santa Monica had a globally recognized well-being project. We succeeded in getting some planned well-being principles added to the downtown community plan, which is a land use plan for our downtown. This is while I was on the Social Services Commission, and I was really interested in that work. And so when an opening appeared, I put in an application. I spoke to multiple council members, and also really had to show that I had been a strong member of the Social Services Commission, because unless you're an experienced land use attorney or architect, someone who's already been working in the field, the Planning Commission is not necessarily a commission you walk into off the street, so to speak. And so that I needed to really kind of show that I knew how to work in government, that I knew how to stay in my lane. We can talk about that too. That I knew how to, build coalitions and get things done and be productive. And I think I've shown that on the Planning Commission. But again, very different. Sort of the audience is very different from each of those 4 bodies, and the processes and what counts for success really vary. So, again, if you're watching this, I really think that it's important to think about, what moves you to serve what is driving you to get involved, and how do you want to engage with others? And candidly, how do you want to be held accountable? What counts for success in your service? Because it's very different depending on the type of commission that you would be looking at.
That was really beautiful and super thorough. And before I ask
and
my
super
next
long
question,
too.
well, that's why it was thorough. Before I ask this next question, I just want to remind folks to please take a moment. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat, or you can put it in the comments if you're on Facebook, and we'll try to make sure that we get to it. You've alluded to a little bit of the bureaucracy and that there are certain ways that you have to maneuver to be successful, but to be transparent, right? And so one of the things that I have really valued is that when I went through the most recent ethics training, when I was appointed to the Civil and Human Rights Commission, I just remember hearing, you can't talk to anybody who can actually make a difference. Like that's what I heard. And I remember thinking, oh dear Lord, like how am I going to do anything? And I called you, and you helped me see, okay, like here's what you can do. Here's where your power is. And you helped me lean into the fact that, when there is public comment, you really listen to people and you make sure that they feel heard. And that's an important part of how you disarm and actually figure out where you can move. And that's a solid value added. And all of a sudden I felt my legs under me again. And so, what are some of the things that you've learned along the way that have helped you become and be more effective, or in a place that just seems like sometimes there's so much legalese all around?
100%. There's a lot of legalese. So the first real issue is to get comfortable with that. In other words, I think commission service, let's just acknowledge that commission service is not for everyone. There are people whose skill sets and passions are about different kinds of work. They're about advocacy work. They're about activism work. They're the work of being a citizen. Our dear friend Brie Lascota talks about this so beautifully, about the different roles that people play in a democracy. And if your role to play in a democracy is that you're the person standing outside the seat of power, right, calling those in power to account, that's a very different role from sitting in the seat of power and thinking about how to ensure that we are accountable and that we do that work. They're very different roles and different personalities. So the first thing is to know the source of your power and to know the source of your credibility with others, right? Let's go back to Gideon. A lot of what he talked about, his effectiveness was rooted in his expertise as an attorney. His subject matter expertise brings him to a lot of these tables. And so his value add is that he's bringing that encyclopedic knowledge and that insightful analytic approach to the work that's being done. Others of us, our value add may be that we're coalition builders. Our value add may be that we can bring people around the table. For others of us, we're walking in, we're actually looking around the table and we're saying, hey, wait a second. Who's not at this table? What do we do to make sure that the people who aren't at this table are at this table? And if we can't get them to the table, let's at least get them in the room so they can be heard, right? So that's one of the things when we're talking about what we can do as opposed to what we can't do. That's a huge piece of it. Think about what our source of strength is, what our source of credibility is, and then how do we interact with others at the table? By the way, I would add, if you're looking around at commissions and you're looking at commissions that have openings, look at who else is on those commissions. Because if you bring a different perspective, whether it's by your background or your training or where in the community you live, or right, any particular aspect of who you are, what you do, why this work matters to you, that's a huge benefit to be. If you walk in, if you look like everybody else on that commission, what's the value add, right? Maybe there is one, that's okay. But like if it's a commission that everybody has to be a lawyer and you're a lawyer, fabulous. But if it's a commission where you want to be able to make the case to your appointing authority that you bring something that nobody else has, that will make up for a huge difference. That makes up for a lot. If, for instance, you feel like you don't have the background or the experience that somebody else might, you might have a different perspective that is, tremendously valuable. I would also say that staff are tremendously important here, right? You can make a lot of progress. You can do a lot of things by working with staff. A lot of the rules are about what you can and can't do with people who aren't in government, people who are appearing before you for whatever reason. But you could always talk to staff, figure out some solutions. And then the last thing I'll say on this is, and this is sort of a post-appointment kind of a trick, but for the first year, you're a newbie, and you might even be a newbie until the next newbie is appointed. And there's power in being the newbie, because if you walk in and you find that the way that something is being done is just really dumb, or you think it's really dumb, you don't have to walk in and say, oh, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. That'll just make other people mad. But you can say, I'm new here and I'm really learning what my role is and what this position is. Could someone explain to me how it is that we've come to do this thing this way? I'd like to come to understand that. Now, the truth is, you might actually learn that there's a good reason for it being the way that it is. But the other piece is that if people in the explanation go, wait, why are we doing it this way? Like, we don't have to do it this way. You actually get to make some change. So you have some power as a new arrival to ask questions that people who've been there for a decade, they don't get to ask anymore because it's assumed that they already know.
That's really solid. And just a great reframe, right? So you can actually have a productive conversation and figure out where your role is. So to close us out, what are you most proud of connected to commissions?
Wow. I mean, one of the things that I'm really proud of is having recruited other people to serve. To be honest, like that story that you just told about our conversation as you were getting started, that gets me out of bed in the morning, because now I know that a little conversation we had has helped the people of Los Angeles, because you will be a better commissioner for it. So, and I have stories of, who am I advocating for to get on commissions? Am I diversifying? Is it, it's people who don't necessarily look like me, really, who need to be on commissions. There are a lot of people who look like me on commissions, I have to say. Too many of us. And some of us are, kind of aware of that, and some of us aren't so aware of that. And then I think, I'm really proud of the moments where I feel like my engagement has moved the needle, where we've been able to get people to think differently, where we've been able to, it was, to give you an example, in the Quality and Productivity Commission, one of the things that I've really pushed for over the time of the period of my service, two things. I pushed for, and I've brought people to the table to push with me. So this is not me alone. I really have to stress that. But data-driven decision-making, not being afraid of data, using it, putting it to work, and user-centered design, where now when people come to us for funding, they understand that they had better already have consulted with the people they're proposing to help before they bring us the proposal, rather than saying, oh yeah, we had this amazing idea and we want you to throw some money at it. No, we had this amazing idea and we talked to the people that it's supposed to help, and they think if we do it this way, it'll make a really big difference. And so we'd like you to help us do that with them and not just for them. And that's what I'm really proud of, is to see that culture shift. And I recognize that it's not, I want to stress this, and this is about commission service. It's not about you, right? It's not about me. It's about the work, and it's about the people who are being served and who are being engaged. And so I'm proud of being part of that process. And helping make it productive. I mean, I can tell you about individual grants that I thought were really cool, or, moments where I think we shifted the dialogue on something, or where I got little pieces of legislation that reflect my influence, that's fine. That's fun. Those are one-offs. The cool thing is who's at the table, because I helped get them see themselves as at the table and get them there, and who's at the table in the big picture, because people that I work with, my colleagues, are changing how they think and how they bring people to the table. There is a question in the chat.
There is.
Yes. Do we have time for that? Take an actual
can you do
an
a
audience
30
question?
second?
I can. So
Do you want to
here's the just really, so it really depends on the city or the county where you're applying. You can, I would not encourage you to apply for more than one commission in the same city. I know a council member who has said repeatedly, this is a former council member, that person would never vote for someone who applied for multiple commissions, because the council member would not know which one they were really serious about. That it looks like you're just commission hopping and you're looking to get your name on a title, or a title on your name, as opposed to, hey, I really care about this thing and you need to be, I want to focus on this. So I would say in a single city, don't do that. But if you're, there's a state commission and a county commission and the city commission, hey, if you have the time and they want you, go for it. Just don't give the impression that you're just shopping around.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, that's actually been really, really helpful. This conversation will continue to live on Facebook and on YouTube, and we'll make sure to put the links in all sorts of places. But Shawn, when you're mentioning the people that you're bringing and access, you've really been my translator in so many ways. I remember the event you had me speak at, it must be the quality board. Sorry, can't remember which one it was. But at the county, right?
Yeah, quality and productivity.
And you helped me understand who the people were, how, and literally we walked around the room and we met Sheila Kuehl and Solis and everybody. And it was access and knowing how to access. And that's what so much of this is orienting each other so that we know how to function. And
I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm going to say that was a moment because we frequently in county events have someone give an invocation. And that was for that particular event, you were not the first Muslim speaker to give an invocation in the county. That had happened already, not so long ago, but you were the first Muslim speaker to give an invocation in the history of the Quality and Productivity Commission and the Productivity and Quality Awards. And when I was chair, I looked at this long list of Christian speakers and, a few rabbi, there was a rabbi from time to time, every so often there was a rabbi, but it pretty much Protestant, Catholic. And I was like, no, this is going to look like the county, and it's going to be women and men, and it's going to be it's going to be Jews and Christians and Muslims and we had a Hindu, we've had a Hindu chaplain give an invocation, but that's also the work. I just want to say, I'm jumping in, but that's also the work. The work is that what does it mean for a county employee or an attendee at that event to look at the front of the room and see a Muslim woman giving the invocation and say, hey, I see myself. I see someone who represents my culture, my religion, my background, my views of the world. And previously, they'd only ever seen someone who looked very different from them. To be able to make that shift in a small setting, you never know the impact that can have, is so powerful. And we have those opportunities in commission service to do that every single day, whether it's in waste management or in land use or in drone regulation. We have the opportunity to do that in all the time. So I just wanted to, because you're a first there, so I wanted to acknowledge that.
That's so well said. Thank you. And the power of diversity, and especially when we pull each other in, there's something that we all benefit with, that the representation, right? Being able to see yourself and and to continue to build from there. I want to, in that same spirit, plug my own commission, which worked with a whole bunch of other people and other departments to launch something called LA for All. It's a citywide campaign, and you'll see posters all over Los Angeles on bus stops, sanitation, and you can actually order your own poster now for free. And it will, they've just launched it. They've got it in English, in all sorts of languages. Oh, perfect. Thank you. And you can actually order your own poster. I think you actually put in the same thing as I did, which is perfect. So all you have to do is click this link, and you can get it in Arabic now, and in a whole bunch of other languages. And I think the whole idea here is that this is a Los Angeles for everyone, that every single one of us deserves to be here and to be seen as an asset and a valuable contributor. So, and I see that Shawn's added in LA versus hate, which is also absolutely essential. Do you want to put one last plug before we wrap up?
Just check out laversushate.org. You all win the poster contest. I mean, those posters are amazing in so many languages. I have them in, I think, Farsi and Spanish and Korean at home. But LA versus hate, check it out. We recently had United Against Hate Week, which was statewide. And we have a really cool social media collateral. So if you are, like a soccer player from Cerritos, there's probably a little GIF that you can put up that says soccer players from Cerritos against hate. And if it doesn't exist, you can actually ask them to make you one. So you all make posters, we make social media.
I love it, right? It's like the best of everyone coming together.
Like rabbis against hate, imams against hate. It's everywhere. It's awesome.
Well, that's the perfect note to end on, like really standing together. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for taking your time to be with us. Please continue to share this video. The whole idea is giving each other access to information and helping us navigate so that we can all be more effective leaders. Have a good night.